Hey YouTube, how are you? So just wanted to do a quick video here about meditation. Yeah. So so what I want to talk about meditation. Yeah. So I remember a few years back trying to learn to meditate and having difficulty finding, having difficulty being able to meditate. It seemed really difficult to be able to do it, and also what is the point, etc. And so you can find various celebrities and other people talking about meditation. And the sort of bottom line tends to be like relaxation. You find some people like, I remember I saw an interview with David Lynch, the director, talking about TM, which is the transcendental meditation, and how by going into transcendental meditation, he could like completely revitalize the system, which seemed like impressive and improbable, you know, improbable and impressive. So it was kind of like, is that possible? So I just want to outline what I view as the sort of path of meditation. I'm going to outline it really quickly, just uh, just to make a really concise beginning. Uh, so the first phase would be meditation until you achieve what's called access concentration. Now I seem to be using Buddhist terms here. I'm not really, I think it's a good framework. The Buddhist framework's really good. I don't really think of myself as a Buddhist, but I think it's a good framework to understand meditation. Um, so the first part is, and perhaps the most important part, is access meditation, access concentration. And what this will come down to is this will come down to choosing the right meditation object. So I think what happens to a lot of people and what happened to me is I was trying to meditate on the breath and I couldn't focus or concentrate. And basically that just means it's the wrong object. Now, sometimes you just have to like keep trying and it might start working. For example, I could never meditate on the breath and now I can. Even now it's kind of like not really there, but I can do it. But the key thing is finding the right meditation object. This, and if you like, so that means what you're going to think about. So the idea is that it's not like you're not going to think about anything. Like you're going to think about something. So choose something you want to think about. So some people might think about their heart. Some people might think about a relationship or some kind of, well, you have to be careful with things like relationships or something like that because that can like spread. There'll be like mission spread in that where it will start becoming a big thing and you're not actually meditating, you're just thinking, right? So there's got to be something quite sort of focused. Um, my own thing is I was using like a sexual idea because that was really magnetic. And so I would use that idea, but in a meditative way and just focus on one idea. But there's lots of different ways of doing this. Um, and Yeah, so there's probably, if you Google suggested meditation objects, let's just do it right now and see what we get, right? Suggested meditation objects, because it's really important. Here's, um, yeah, well, there's a whole world here on Google. So I would say, so look up what a good meditation object is. Now, a meditation object is something, a mental idea. It's not like um, I mean, it could be. I was going to say it's not like I'm going to meditate on a piece of paper, although it could be that way. But I think the way to start is with some kind of mental idea, or some kind of uh, like for example, when I was thinking about meditating on the breath, I was trying to visualize breath, which doesn't that's difficult to visualize. So what people are really doing is they're meditating on the feeling of the air passing the nostril. So the idea is you try a bunch of different objects until you find something which really clicks with you and you find that you can focus on it really easily. And this is like really important because if you can't do that, nothing else works, right? Um, okay, so why is this why is this important? Because uh, unlike what you may have heard, meditation is not actually about relaxation, right? It's about something else, and uh, and it's really it's really cool and exciting what's possible. So once you've found like your meditation object, then you have to sort of get into this stage called access concentration, and this is where you just sort of like you actually you have sort of perfect focus on the object, right? So this is like considered like a big success if you can do this, right? If you can focus on an object and achieve focus, you've accomplished something really useful. So that's like phase one of meditation. Now, depending on which I'm using the sort of Buddhist outline here. So like the way I understand it, which is probably imperfect, is once you've achieved access concentration, then you can start thinking about moving or sort of refining the sense of focus and concentration, right? Um, hold on a second. And so the way you do this is you start well, one of the best ways of doing this is after you've been in excess concentration for a while, is hopefully what will happen is you're going to start feeling good, right? You'll start feeling good because you're sort of eliminating all the noise like in your life or whatever. And so you're going to start sort of having a good feeling generally. Now, sometimes that feeling can manifest sort of physically, right? It just feels like relief or calm or whatever. And so the next phase of this is what you do is you actually change your meditation object. So let's say, for example, I'm meditating on my nose, for example, right? I'm meditating on the sense, my feeling of the nose. So maybe after a while, I gain access concentration and I start feeling really sort of happy because there's complete calm in my mind because I've sort of achieved this state. What you do is you change the object of meditation. So you stop thinking about the sensation in your nose and you start thinking about the feeling of calm or joy that you have, right? So it's this feeling which feels so good, and you start using that as the meditation object. So what's actually happened here is we've started like in the physical world, right? And that physical practice has generated something a bit more abstract, which is a feeling of, let's call it joy, right? And so what you do is you start focusing on the feeling of joy. Now, when you do this, um, you're, you already know how to sort of have this access concentration, but now that you've sort of refined it into a new form, there's a new form which has sort of been released from the access concentration, and the new form which has been released is joy. So you start meditating on this, and that starts to feel really good. Now, what we're talking about here actually is we're talking about states of awareness, which are known in Buddhism as jhanas. There's a bunch of different ways to spell this. It's usually Jhana, jhana. Sometimes it's dhyana, Dhyana, or something like that, dhyana, but it's like jhana, right? And so these are like refined states of consciousness. Now, I'm gonna have to read this because I always forget what the actual here we go. Yeah. So these are important because this is like the path. It's the path to a lot of things, but like oh, the other thing is in Buddhism, there are typically considered to be four primary jhanas, right? And then after that, there's four like extended or advanced jhanas. However, there's a bunch of different interpretations depending on what school of Buddhism you're in. And so like I've seen as many as 32 jhanas. And then like in different religions or different schools of thinking, there are different interpretations. So, for example, my introduction to the jhanas came from doing hermetic meditation on the elements. And what I discovered is that by meditating on earth, that would transform or become refined when I moved into water, and that would become refined into uh, fire and refined into air. So that became my way of moving through these things. And then when I discovered the sort of intellectual concept of the jhanas, I recognized it as the same kind of conscious transformation. Now, this doesn't just happen in for me. I'm actually reading an interesting paper right now, which is called "The Buddhist Jhanas and the Mystical Prayer and Its Degrees," and it talks about the states of Saint Teresa of Avila in her book, "The Mansions of" what's that book called? The Mansions. She wrote an amazing book, which is really intense. The Interior Castle. It's called The Interior Castle, and in that she describes her states of prayer, which are sort of contemplations. Now, this paper is really interesting because it discusses how a lot of Christians will not accept the fact that mystical prayer could be compared to the jhanas, and they talk quite a lot about how generally in Christianity they won't be having it that prayer can be or contemplation can be compared to sort of meditative states, and there do appear to be some distinct differences with the manifestations, but they're pretty subtle differences. I mean, essentially they seem kind of like the same thing, in the same way that the hermetic practice uh, is similar to the jhanas. So the point is we go through this process of refining consciousness, right? And so it starts off by moving into a good feeling. Um, so the first four jhanas work like this. So the first jhana is entered, I'm reading this here, when one is secluded from sensuality and unwholesome mental factors. Um, there is rapture. So this is the idea. Is what happens is when you gain access concentration, then you start moving into this feeling of joy. You achieve this state which is called piti, and piti just feels really good. It's like this feeling which feels really good. Now, if you have kundalini, it's really easy to get into the state because you've probably got a sense of rapture already somewhere in your body, right? So that's probably why this was so easy for me, is because like oftentimes I'll just have like a weird sense of energy in my body. So you focus your meditation on the energy, right? So if you have sensations of energy in your body, try meditating on the energy as the meditation source, right? Now, what happens is once you get into this state, you you can move into the second jhana, and the second jhana is a refinement. So the first state, and these states are, I think, commonly known as samadhis, right? So these are like what's the word? They're kind of like refined states of consciousness, and the word I'm looking for is refined states of consciousness. I can't think of the right word, but the idea. So anyway, so the next thing is once you get into the state of samadhi with the piti, which is this very strong, pleasurable sensation, then what you do is you move into the next stage, and that's where you start feeling joy. You start feeling joy about the sensation. So you're sort of transforming it now from this sort of physical sensation into this sort of like slightly different kind of sensation. You might call it an emotional sensation. And you see, this is why I started recognizing this with the elements, because you got the physical sensation of feeling good, and then you transform it into joy. So there's like a transformation from the physical into the emotional, which sort of corresponds with like the earth to water transformation. Right? And so what you do is now you focus on that sense. Um, and that's the next jhana. So that's the second jhana. Um, and so the next jhana, the third jhana, is the same thing, but what you do is you start sort of detaching. You start detaching from the sense of joy, and you sort of move more into what they call a sort of equanimity, which is where you're sort of aware of this joy, but you're not really connected to the joy, right? So you're not like attached. You're feeling it, but you're not attached to it. And that becomes the focus of the meditation, is in this sort of sense. It's sort of a it's almost like well, it's hard to describe because it's a little more refined, right? It's just a little bit more abstract, right? It's a little bit more abstract, but you move into the state, and that's like the third jhana. Then the fourth jhana is super, it's got like fourth jhana is purity of equanimity and mindfulness, right? So it's in a way, if you think of purity of equanimity and mindfulness, it really is kind of like the air element. It's kind of like the mindfulness is air element, and the equanimity. And equanimity is one of those words which are like, I like to say it, but what does it actually mean? Uh, Equanimity. Meaning, let's just look it up so we can discuss what it means. Calmness and composure, especially in a difficult situation. So yeah, so basically the fourth jhana is just like a further refinement, and all these are like progressive refinements of the previous states. Now, there's a really sort of good book, which is like the definitive book on the jhanas, which I read a while ago, and I've been reading it again recently, just to sort of go over some of these ideas. It's called Right Concentration. It's by a guy called Leigh Brasington. Brasington or Basington? Brasington. Leigh Brasington. And it's a really good book about the jhanas and describes pretty well how to advance through them. Um, one of the things is, it seems to me like in Buddhism, there's uh, there's like a real path which is kind of defined by the noble truths and all that stuff about how you're supposed to conduct yourself, and this sort of moral and ethical part to it, which is probably important, but it's not necessary to move into these advanced states of consciousness. Now, actually, it is necessary to it's necessary if you want to move into definitive jhanas as defined by Buddhism. But if you want to move through conscious states, which are pretty much parallel, um, then that's less important because you can move through refined consciousness in various ways. So, for example, Hermetic meditation, while it talks about refinement of consciousness and sort of long term purification, you can clearly move through these states without doing it. I know because I did it, right? You can move through, uh, and I think that's sort of more of a tantric way of doing it, right? So in the tantric path, you would actually engage with the impurities, for example, and but you have to, if you do that, you have to do it in a very conscious. You have to be very, very conscious about it because it's easy to stop meditating and start thinking, and that doesn't lead you into deeper meditation. It leads you into delusion and potentially madness, um, which is good to know. Um, so those are the first four jhanas. Now the jhanas are what they say is if you're lucky enough to get into the fourth jhana, you're one of a very small group of people because most people can't get into jhanas. And typically, the way to get to jhanas is really you have to sort of prepare mentally and purification and this kind of thing. But I think that's probably true if you're just like your average Joe off the street, you know. If you've Yeah, because like 6 or 7 years ago, I couldn't have entered into jhanas because I couldn't meditate, you know. But if you get any sort of, like I said, like Kundalini and this kind of thing, um, it becomes really easy to move into these states. Uh, no, there's four other jhanas. Oh, the other thing is once you move into these refined states of consciousness, these states, yeah. So there's like two different kinds of meditation in Buddhism, right? There's and not just in Buddhism, but generally, there's concentration meditation and there's insight meditation, right? So this, what we're describing here, moving into the jhanas, is what would be called concentration meditation, right? You're concentrating on an object, you're moving into samadhi, and then you're refining you're refining you're changing the object of meditation. So once you achieve like the access concentration, and you can't do any of this, right? So unless you got to choose the right meditation object, right? You have to choose the right something that really magnetizes your mind to it, right? Boom. Now, once you've done that, then you're going to be able to like achieve access. And then what you do is you change the object of meditation. So you change to the good feeling. Then you change the joy about the good feeling. Then you change to sort of like detachment from the feeling of joy. Then you change into sort of this mindful equanimity of the attachment, right? And so there's like this refinement. Now it seems really subtle, like, dude, that's like it's almost like there's no difference, right? It's almost like there's no difference there, but there's a really distinct difference, right? And you start realizing this like as you move through these states of consciousness, you start really they're very distinct and beautiful. Now, one of the interesting things about this is like once you're in like the fourth, even before the fourth jhana, you can do it very quickly. If you're in access concentration, you can do it actually. But like once you're in this state of focus, um, you can go into this sort of insight meditation. And so insight meditation is where you've got this high sense of focus. And this focus is like the sense of concentration is what I sometimes describe in my videos is like a piercing, cutting diamond, right? It's the it's like a laser of truth. And so what happens is once you've got this laser of truth, which is your focus, you can allow your mind to roam a little bit. And when your mind's roaming, this is called insight meditation. And so what you might do is you might contemplate something like what's the meaning of life or does karma exist and this kind of thing. And often what happens is because you've got this piercing ray of consciousness, like it moves through reality like a diamond cutter, and you can oftentimes pierce through into other realms of awareness. Now, this is also how you might evoke spirits. So, what happens is when you've got this incredibly focused meditation, you could, like, for example, think about Krishna, for example, right? And, or Ganesha. Or if you're really spooky, something evil, but you don't want to do that, it's really bad news. Now, what you want to do is try and keep your mind focused on good things because what you'll discover is that all the things you read about are true. Like all the good and evil things are true. They're hidden from normal consciousness. But as you're traveling and transforming your ability to focus, you've now got the ability to pierce through this reality and see into these other layers of reality. And you have to be careful what you look for because you will find it. Um, Yeah. And so like I think like if you've got like a if you've got Kundalini or something, you can probably pierce through that like in the first four jhanas. But generally, like the higher jhanas are what's generally considered like the place to do it. And so the higher jhanas are actually more refined states of consciousness. And so those would be the fifth jhana is what happens is when you get to the fourth jhana, you're already in this sort of state of like detached equanimity, right? And so as you move into the fifth jhana, and what they say is moving from the fourth to the fifth jhana is actually trickier than moving into the first jhana because it's actually kind of like you're sort of moving into sort of no self kind of zone. Um, so the fifth jhana is called infinite space. So what will happen is you'll start contemplating infinite space. I'll just go through these quickly. The sixth jhana is that sensation changes and you start perceiving infinite consciousness. Seventh jhana, it gets refined, you start perceiving infinite nothingness. And the eighth jhana is neither perception nor non-perception, right? So it's not even nothingness, it's beyond nothingness, right? So that's like the eighth jhana. um, so there's a bunch of ways you can meditate on this. And it's funny because I didn't even realize that I had meditated through these jhanas because I hadn't read about the jhanas. I was doing something else. Like I was meditating on I was getting led to different topics and I knew I was refining consciousness, but I didn't realize how, or I didn't really have a framework for it, even though I was sort of using sort of basic like elementals. elemental structure, but after I went through the elements and then through akasha, right? And so like this is the thing, if you're doing elemental meditation, you start in air, you start in earth, water, fire, air, and then you go up to akasha. That's basically akasha is the fifth jhana. It's infinite space, more or less, right? I mean, there's differences, right? There's differences in the sense of focus and the prerequisites if you want to be like a typical Buddhist kind of thing, right? Um, but essentially, that's what you're doing. Um, and then, anyway, this idea, I was going through meditations a few years ago where it was like omnipresence, right? And then omniscience, meditating on omniscience, right? Um, this kind of stuff. And so, like, the funny thing is those states can also be in some systems can be assigned the different chakras, right? And this kind of thing. And so, if you focus, if you've got this piercing diamond of consciousness and you start pushing it through and you start locating it, or in this case, obviously, if you're into infinite space, you're not really locating it anymore. You're kind of transcending the location of it, right? Now, the other thing I should say is like in Buddhism, it's considered that you can't actually make these states happen. All you can do is kind of prepare for them, and you kind of prepare for them, and you have an intention to move into jhanas, but then they kind of happen by themselves based upon your purity of intention and this kind of stuff. But there seems to be some differing opinions about that, and one of those differing opinions is my own. I think you can kind of move through those. And the reason I think you can do that is because you clearly can, because there's a bunch of people online who are advanced Buddhist meditators, and they do this very quickly because it sounds like, I mean, if I'm talking about these eight jhanas, it sounds like really high level mystical states, right? Like, wow, you got to be like a Buddhist master to do this. But I mean, you can find people online doing this who are very respected and they do like ladders going up and down the jhanas. And this is one of the practices is once you figure out how to do this, um, like learning how to enter the jhanas is important, but what's more important is the insight meditation. Like that's actually a sort of more important jumping off point. So the problem is like moving through the jhanas can take a long time because there's eight of them, and then you get to establish access. Another thing is each one of them is really pleasurable and sort of cool. So sometimes you don't want to move, right? So what happens a lot of times is people will get into the PT, like the first or second jhana, and they don't want to leave from there because it's so pleasurable, right? It's so pleasurable. Um, you don't really want to advance, right? And you can still do sort of insight practice there too. And so, and it's fast and this kind of stuff. So a lot of times what they do is once you get a certain state, then the meditator is taught by his teacher to move quickly through them. So I posted years ago about a guy who I found who was teaching people, and they were going through the eight jhanas in like 5 minutes up, and then 5 minutes back down, then back up and back down. And so it's this state of being able to like enter quickly and moving into insight meditation quickly, right? And then there's other guys who move into these states and then they'll stay put in one of the jhanas for like a day or 2 days or whatever it is, right? So if you ever see those guys, they find them in Tibet, they're 100 years old and they thought they were dead. They're in like a jhana state kind of thing, right? So that sounds like, oh, okay, that's the point. That's the point of meditation. So the point of meditation isn't to be relaxed. The point of meditation is to enter into these altered states, which is what they are. They're altered states, and then learn about reality through insight meditation. That's the point of meditation. No, it's not. But it's way better than relaxing, right? It's way better than relaxing. Um, but that's not the final stage. There's four more stages, which would be called the four stages of enlightenment. And let's just talk about what those are quickly, if I can find a good reference here. I sort of started doing this and I'm not really prepared, but here we are. Okay. So the four stages of enlightenment are stream entry, once returner, never returner, and arahant. And so what does that mean? So the first stage is a stream enterer. And this is really important. If you're interested in these things, it's really important, right? So stream entry was something I was like, because I knew that I was going up and down through these jhanas and stuff. But I was reading the book Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha by Daniel Ingram a few years ago, and he discusses stream entry. And so you're like, well, what's stream entry? And I was thinking, well, I'm like moving through states, and I'm moving into different dimensions because like when you're in these states, you can move into different dimensions of consciousness. You can evoke spirits. I was evoking Krishna and Ganesha in the bedroom and stuff, but I'm like, okay, I guess that's stream entry. But um, I don't think that's really what stream entry is. And this is something which just occurred to me recently as a result of doing the rasa transmission. Because basically, what the rasa transmission is it's stream entry. That's what it is. It's friggin' stream entry. But you might not realize that. So the question becomes: is okay, what is stream entry? Because when you think about it, access concentration, that it sounds like you're entering into some kind of stream, right? You're entering into the stream of meditation, right? But that's not actually what's going on, as far as my understanding of this is concerned. But let's just read what does it say here about stream entry. Okay, this is called the first stage. It means one who enters the stream. The stream enterer is said to have opened the eye of Dharma and is guaranteed enlightenment after no more than 7 rebirths, possibly fewer. The stream enterer can also be sure that he will not be reborn. And it goes on about this, like not being reborn. When you become a stream enterer, you can never again believe that you're really a separate self that lives inside your head and looks through your eyes. Your experience forever eliminates this illusion. When you look within, you cannot find a self anywhere, and this is the key of what stream entry is, and it's also the key of what it's also the key of rasa. Now, Guy Green, our mind is actually the mind is a stream of consciousness, but that's not what stream entry is. Um, this is my understanding of it, and I'm pretty confident that yeah, I mean, you can't be confident of anything at this state, right? So this is just my interpretation. But I'm pretty sure, like for me, this is true. Um, there is something listen. Here's the deal: is there's lots of people online, and I've been one of these people talking about Kundalini, visions, spirit world, all these things, right? And that seems like, hey, I've achieved higher consciousness, right? I'm talking about, there aliens exist, and I'm communicating with the Pleiadians and whatever. I evoked a demon, all these things, and oh wow, you've really got higher consciousness. I feel Kundalini, and I'm channeling spirits, right? That's here's the big surprise: is that's not higher consciousness. I mean, it seems like it is, and it is, right? It's higher than normal, but that's not what it is. Um, what it is that is the Shakti component of consciousness, right? I call it Shakti, or I mean, the Buddhists would call it Mara, right? The Christians would call it the satanic aspect, which isn't really fair, really, because that's got so many negative connotations. Although I can understand why they have those connotations. So what it is it's the mind. It's the mind aspect of consciousness, the ego aspect. And so what's stream entry? Stream entry is, and it's hard to talk about it because you can't really talk about it. But the way I've been thinking about it is like the Shiva aspect of consciousness, right? So the Shakti aspect is energy and sort of binding binding the ego into this reality, and that's the Shakti. And then the stream entry is when you achieve these refined states, it becomes possible to leave the becomes possible to become aware of another reality which is not Shakti based, and that is basically what it is. It's non-duality. It's like the non-dual awareness, and that is what the rasa transmission provides. It basically awakens you into non-dual awareness or stream entry, and it's considered an enlightenment path for that reason. So essentially, rasa is stream entry. but most people won't think of it that way because they haven't read or they don't really understand it. So you might see a lot of people have sort of non-dual awareness and stuff in videos, but they don't talk about it in this context because they just haven't thought about it this way. And so they'll just say things like, well, nothing is real, and this is an illusion, and there's no point discussing it, and this kind of stuff, right? But actually, one of the reasons I prefer Tantra to Buddhism is because Tantra takes this. It doesn't. Tantra doesn't view things as an illusion. It views this as part of the divine manifestation, and the idea of divinity and stuff is like, I mean, who even knows what this is? Who even knows? I mean, the truth is like if we're thinking about if we're thinking about typical ideas about God or Jesus or Shiva or whatever. I mean, all those concepts which we're using are basically inside of Shakti. Everything you can mentally summon to think about God is part of Shakti. I mean, it's just like it's not what it is. So like when you see this, and like now I think like I've been doing these sort of Jhana meditations for a while. So I think what's happened is over the years I've actually gone into stream entry, but I didn't realize what it was. And like when I was entering into the sort of non-dual space, I would get scared and I'd like push it away and I'd run away from it because I didn't understand what it was. But with the rasa, it just basically boom, it just opened up, and you can't really describe it in any way. It's bigger than description. So it's not really very helpful. But I mean, stream entry is a good way of saying it. So the difference is the way I would describe it, maybe if I could, is that Shakti is like a low resolution copy of the real thing, right? So the real thing is Shiva or Vishnu or Christ or God or whatever you want to call it, which you cannot describe in any way. And Shakti, which is what everybody who's doing energy work and evoking spirits and doing your standard ceremonial work in a church or whatever, they're working with this Shakti based energy. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's uh it's not evil. It's just complex, right? It's what is it they say in Facebook? If you're in a relationship, it's complicated, right? It's complicated. Um, but the stream entry is where you just oh oh, and so that's what this description of stream entry is saying. Is basically saying that is like you can never again believe that you're really a separate self, right? And then so you get these four different stages: once returner, never returner, and then arahant. Now that guy Daniel Ingram, who wrote Mastering the Core Teaches of the Buddha, he says that he's an arahant. Some people question that, um, and I think I might question that myself, partly because he does Bardonian magic, also, which it seems to me like if you're if you have a refined, because this is the thing. Like, here's the thing: Franz Bardon was sort of against becoming an ascetic. So, I mean, I'm not saying that Buddhism is the path of asceticism, but it's kind of more ascetic than Hermetic magic. And so Bardon said that magicians were the highest level of consciousness a human can attain to. And the Buddhists say that an arahant is, and like after arahant, you become a Buddha, basically, right? Um, so yeah, I wonder if Daniel Ingram's an arahant or not, but he certainly knows what he's talking about. He's very, very knowledgeable, and he can describe all these states very fluently. And he's clearly done a lot of work with this stuff and knows what he's doing. Um, but I think I'm just reading what Guy has written here about the astrological transformation of the elements. That's interesting. Very interesting. I didn't know that. Cool. Um, yeah. So I think if you do the rasa, and you got to be like really think about rasa because it's like it's deep, like the whole stream entry thing. Because I just recognized that like in the last 2 or 3 weeks, like that's what it is. it's stream entry into this understanding. And it's also separation. It's like a profound separation from what you traditionally thought of as yourself. So if you think of yourself as Scott, that's over, right? It's just over. And there's still like, yeah, it's like if you put vinegar in milk in a glass, like it separates, but it's still in the same glass, but there's a separation, right? Now, eventually, it'll probably completely separate, but there's like a process of separation which occurs, right? And so rasa is kind of like the vinegar, right? Rasa separates the self and gives you awareness of this Shiva consciousness, which is pretty staggering. But the rest is actually quite good. Like it's at least for me, it seems like the timing of it, like the process is like at a really good pace. So it's like it's there are moments where it becomes super powerful and almost like scary, just like what's revealed. But then it just pulls back and gives you time to sort of think about that, and then it reveals a little more, and you're like, "What?" And then it pulls back, and so it has a sort of process of sort of teaching you, of like preparing you almost for what's happening. And there's like almost like yeah, there's almost like a teacher teaching you these things as the separation occurs. But anyway, that's the main thing here. I just want to talk about this process of meditation, about how this sort of goes through these stages. And so the first thing to do is find a way to achieve access concentration, because you obviously can't achieve any of these other things. Um, Now, for me personally, these days I'm not really meditating that much lately. I mean, a bit, but not much. Like there was a stage where I was doing like 3 hours a day meditating, and during those stages, I would get very high up into the jhanas. Um, Probably up to the eighth jhana, but not. I wouldn't stay up in that area because I would tend to like do evocation and stuff. Not even intentionally, but what happens is as you move through these stages, you find yeah, well, yeah, yeah. Sarah is saying, can consciousness itself be the start of separation? And yeah, here's the thing: is like everything I'm talking here about, like Shiva and Shakti and evocation. This is all imaginary. None of these categories actually exist, right? And this is one of the weird things: is that consciousness itself is the container, right? So consciousness is revealing itself, but it's actually what's being revealed, what's being removed also is consciousness, right? So it's like consciousness is the container, consciousness is the curtain, consciousness is also what's revealing consciousness. Um, it's just crazy. It's just crazy. And this is something I'm thinking about a lot lately. Actually, is that there, especially like as you move through your own attachments. Yeah, this is one of the benefits of rasa too, is like all of your own attachments become really raw and obvious. Like you can just see them in their raw form, and you can see what conceals them, and I mean, you can see all the energy structures. You can see it all. And the funny thing is, you're looking at it, but they still have their effect, right? You can see it. You're like, oh my goodness, here's this, here's this attachment which is calling my name, and I can see what it's doing, and its energy structure is still having an effect on me, right? And you're like, this is crazy. And so what happens is because you've separated from the Scott, you've separated from the ego self, you almost become compassionate and like, okay, there goes Scott again, going down this path. Wow, that's foolish, or whatever it is, right? And it's like you can see the ego like doing this stuff, but the sense of separation is really it's really comforting, because previously what happened, like say for example, you got some like addiction to like smoking cigarettes, whatever, right? And you're like trying not to try, fuck it, I'll just smoke it, right? I'll smoke a cigarette, right? And then you're like, then afterwards, like, God damn it, I was told myself I wasn't going to do that, but you did it anyway, right? And so what is that energy? I mean, what is that like? And like the magnetism of the idea. right? I mean, the magnetism of that idea. Tobacco's a good one. Tobacco's so addictive, right? And it's like what is the energy? I mean, that little tweak of energy, and there's like a fulcrum, right? It's almost like, I mean, what is that, right? And you can see it, and it's attractive, 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 but then something happens, and once you've engaged, then you're like, okay, but then there's these other tertiary effects. So this is what I was talking about in my last video about the thermodynamics of consciousness, right? So what happens is as you engage with the energy concept, which in this case is desire for tobacco, like there's friction. So the friction that might be like shame or regret. So there are these like friction effects caused by engagement with this energy structure. And it's not just tobacco, it's like tons of stuff in your life, right? With relationships, with I mean very much with relationships and conversations, and you start becoming aware of other people's how other people. What's funny is like nobody, very few people have any idea about the dynamics of consciousness. I mean, who's going to have any ideas about this stuff, really? Because nobody's conscious, right? Even the people who think they're conscious aren't conscious, because consciousness really is consciousness about consciousness. It's about the dynamics of consciousness. That's right. So all of these techniques here for meditation and focusing, it's really about it's about it's about putting a pin. It's like putting a pin into a dynamic flow and trying to pin down one aspect of it just for a second so you can actually figure out what the hell is going on, right? Because otherwise everything is just moving, and basically everybody we know is just moving, and they have no idea that they're two flows of consciousness which aren't coming from them. And so this is one of the interesting things too, is this idea of like non-doership is what they call it. It's where you start realizing that all the things you do in your life, you're not actually doing them, right? You're observing the things happening. Now what happens is you become attached to it and you think it's me. I'm doing this, right? Right? I'm drinking 8 beers and driving home. That's bad, right? But it's actually it's actually happening. It's happening. And so what you have to do is you have to start detaching, and the sense of detachment from the action actually removes a huge amount of energy. Like once you detach, then the energy behind the attachment greatly diminishes, and it's much easier to like defuse negative, what might be perceived from your ego self as negative attachments, right? Not that any of it matters, right? From the sort of perspective of consciousness, but yeah, the other thing I was going to say too is like as you move into these states of consciousness, like with these refined states, and if you should, a lot of times what appear to us as attachments, personal attachments, is my personal attachment, right? This is my attachment, and I'm responsible for it. But actually, a lot of these attachments are modulated, or what's the word I'm looking for? Are moderated by demonic forces, um, which also don't exist ultimately, but they exist in the context of Shakti, and they're invisible, and they are higher level forces which are curating the magnetism of various attachments. And it's good to be aware of that because you can't see that. What happens is the attachment comes up. You get your, you become attached to the attachment, and then you think, oh, I'm responsible for this. And it's actually being curated by other forces a lot of the times, all the time, because I think that's what non-doership would say, that this, everything that happens in your life is actually just happening, and you're just observing it. And so this is, I think this is part of the reason about the whole I am meditation thing is like, is moving into just becoming, yeah, I think eventually once you do all these these meditations, once you do all these meditations, eventually just meditating on the separation. So part of this is like there's different places you can meditate. So meditating like on the difference between joy and equanimity, like there's a space between those two things, right? And so you can meditate on those like between the second and third or the third and fourth jhana, and you can meditate on the differences between those two states. And so you're sort of playing between two states and sort of observation of what that means, right? And then like you can start meditating later in later stages, like because what I'm doing now is I'm just sort of meditating on I'm just meditating on this sort of Shiva consciousness thing, whatever you like, the Atman or Brahman, I guess is what Nisargadatta would call it. So that's what I'm meditating on now. Is I just start meditating on that because that seems like it's actual truth. Um, I think attachments and aversions define the ego. I think I'm not sure. Probably. I don't know if it's necessary, but I think if you're not in a state of attachment, then you're not actually in the ego as it's commonly thought of, And yeah, so that may be true. Yeah. It's hard to say. It certainly seems like if you become unattached, if you become unattached, then you can start moving into stream entry, right? And then it's sort of like you start separating from the ego. So the ego is specifically uh, its role its role is to tie the consciousness into this plane of existence, right? That's its role. That doesn't mean it's evil. That's just its role, right? And I think you don't want to. The other thing is you don't want to fight against the ego. Like you don't want to be like Neo in the Matrix and fight against. You just can't do that, right? The only thing that works is awareness, right? So if you fight against the ego, you go crazy, you go mad because the ego has defensive measures which are way more powerful than anything you can imagine or I can imagine, but it's very dangerous to start fighting against it. The only thing that works is awareness, right? Because in a way, if you start fighting against the ego, you have to use the ego to fight against it, and you end up with this weird energy loop which just sort of collapses in on itself. So that doesn't work. So the only thing that works is this sort of equanimity, right? It's this sort of like consciousness about consciousness. And so it's like if you shine the light of consciousness, that that's like the trump card of all things, uh, the light of awareness, um, and then yeah, the whole stream thing, the whole enlightenment thing is I mean, yeah, what can you even say about it? I don't think you can even talk about it really. It's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable and crazy. And what happens is like you find yourself thinking about you get this vibe of like it's all a simulation, but and you see this a lot of times with people who've sort of entered non-duality. They think everything's a simulation, and they go through a period of like very uncomfortable period. And I can see that. That's really easy to get into that state. So when I get into those states, I just start reminding myself of the tantric approach, which is that this reality, while a simulation, is actually part of divinity too, right? It's part of the structure of reality. And this whole thing about the concept of divinity, which I'm using this word divinity, which is not, it's not accurate because we don't know what it is. There's no word to explain what this is. And like whatever's been revealed to me at those levels, it's beyond any religion or metaphysics or anything I've ever seen. It's beyond their understanding, right? Um, the end. But certainly being aware of it is better. Uh, Probably. I mean, yeah, for me personally, it's definitely better. I think there's some people probably doesn't matter, if you're really happy and, maybe it doesn't matter, right? So I'm certainly happy to be conscious of it, and if I feel more liberated, literally, uh, because of the awareness of it. Anyway, my whole thing here was just to talk briefly about the meditation concepts here, and as usual, I've been talking way too long and had some mission creep here talking about personal experiences, but um, but I think that's the general gig is access concentration, focus on a good feeling, move into joy, move into mild equanimity, move into detachment and equanimity, then move into the sense of all is space and nothingness and all these other jhanas. Yeah. And then, like I said, as you move through the jhanas, it's quite common for people, or it's not common. None of these things are common, right? But it can happen that you move into stream entry without energy transmissions or without drugs. But I've meditated my ass off for 5 years and 6 years, and I've done plenty of drugs. And it seems to me that if I hadn't had the rasa transmission, I might not have been aware of this stuff. And also, to be fair, like a lot of like, well, not a lot of people, but there's a guy who was speaking to on the channel for a while there, who's a Christian priest, and he was saying that Kundalini is evil and it's the devil, and it's not, but it's like I can see how people think that. And oh, the other thing is that a lot of people say that Kundalini is the Holy Spirit, and it does feel that way. But I think the reason some Christians get try and say that Kundalini is not the Holy Spirit is because of this distinction with the stream, which I'm thinking of like it's like the stream of eternity. It's just like the stream of eternity coming from God or whatever it is, and that it is distinct from Kundalini. It is quite distinct. And having said that, it's distinct, but it works together with Kundalini. Like Kundalini and Shiva seem to work, or Shakti and Shiva clearly work together. They work together, and so like these uh, these veils which are revealed to reveal consciousness are actually Shakti. This part of Shakti is what it is, right? So as you're revealing them, it's actually it's like high definition revelation um, as these encapsulated truths are unveiled. But I think that's what the difference is. And like I was saying, I think if some Christians have a really strong vibe about that, then what's happening is they're perceiving the stream of eternity as Christ, which seems fair enough to me. I mean, I don't think you can argue with that. I mean, if that's the highest form of truth that somebody has, then I think that's what you'd call it. And then, if you're Hindu, you'd call it something else, but that's what it is. It's this unbelievably mind-blowing. And I didn't think there'd be anything more powerful than Kundalini, to be honest with you. Like Kundalini has kicked my ass up and down the street for the last 5 or 6 years, you know. Um, yeah, I think there's a bunch of ways of thinking about it, guys. Like, yeah, I mean, I think Sushumna is presence, right? Sushumna is presence, and and Shiva and Shakti could become like there's a way of thinking about them where they would be like Ida and Pingala, right? Or the future and the past, the moon and the sun, and Sushumna is now this this eternal moment. So yeah, I would say that's true. And then obviously this eternal moment sometimes gets translated into being Shiva or being God or Jesus, wherever it is, right? But and that's just because there's no words to explain it. So you just use the highest word we've got, right? So that's kind of yeah, that's what it is, right? Yes, I mean if you guys are all like super powered conscious seekers, do the rasa, finish-me.com. I can't say enough about it. I mean, I think a whole bunch of people have done it. bunch of people have had big effects. Some people didn't feel much, but like people who've done preparation and done a lot of meditation or done a lot of ayahuasca or whatever seem to get like a big bump from it. Um, like I clearly got a big bump from it, but quite a few people have had big bumps from it, like in their consciousness, like really pushing them into this state. Um, but again, it's a big state, right? It's a big state shift. It's not to be, it's not something to do lightly. You know, it's like seriously think about it. It's kind of an ass kicker. I mean, it's the ass kicker. Like it's literally the separation of the ego. So yeah, but as you can see, I'm like clearly speaking from my ego at the moment. You know, I mean, this is like I'm still moving in and out of it. You know, and it, like the last 2 days, I've been sort of feeling quite Scott-like, but it's RASA stands for yes RASA, and the website I'll put it here is called finish me.com. Yeah. And this is RASA stands for Ramaji Advaita Shaktipat Attunement. Yeah, so this guy Ramaji was an American guru who he had Kundalini when he was 16. He went to India and became enlightened by one of the disciples of Ramana Maharshi. Um, and so this attunement is in the lineage of Ramana Maharshi. And the guy who taught him was actually a disciple of Nisargadatta too. So it's in that sort of tradition. And I can attest to that because, like, as I moved into non-duality, uh, it's just obvious. It's just obvious. That's what it is. I mean, I'm just telling you, it is what I'm saying sounds. It sounds like a label somebody might put on. I'm telling you, that's what it is. You can tell. Like once you move into the state, you're like, holy fuck, that's what it is, right? Um, yeah, non-dual awareness. Or if you read what stream entry is very much non-dual awareness. Yeah. Um, and this is what's known as awakening. So you get Kundalini awakening. And you see, if you talk to a lot of Buddhists, Buddhists don't really take Kundalini awakening very seriously. They sort of like downplay it. And they call it the arising and passing away. So it's not even considered like all that big deal. I mean, I'm not sure about that. I've like for me, it was a really big deal. Like I think maybe some Buddhists don't really get the whole experience. Maybe they move into awakening, like awakening to like the stream of infinity, um, which is bigger, frankly. But like maybe, but like for me, Kundalini awakening was a huge big deal, right? Clearly, that's why I'm doing these videos for the last what 9 years, or whatever. You know, um, it was a big deal, and like some of the things I've seen through Kundalini, I don't hear a lot of Buddhists talking about them, so I think they don't know. They don't know it's possible through Kundalini. Um, and I think the awakening is only possible because of Kundalini. But that, yeah, it is. It's an energy transmission. It comes from Kundalini, or Kundalini is part of the process. Um, yeah, I guess so. I guess the streams of consciousness. I don't think they end up in the ocean of omnipresence. Everything's already there. Everything's in the ocean of omnipresence. The only thing which makes you think it's not is the encapsulation which you're experiencing, right? But that's an illusion. It's not an illusion. It's an encapsulation of a. It's a fold of consciousness, right? Which has been created by Kundalini in some sense, right? There's an encapsulation. There's like a refinement. So this is one of the processes. Like as you move through these like refined states of consciousness, like through the jhanas, it trains your mind to perceive these very fine differences in quality in the conscious structure. And so that's what's really helpful because then, like, when your mind's trained to that level, then you can start to see these distinctions because the refinement and I mean, these layers of consciousness are pretty much like transparent. Like, so it's like you, like, I mean, you can't see them physically, but even like in consciousness, you often can't see them, but you might become aware of them through other, just through other vibrational factors, right? So part of the whole meditation technique of refinement trains you to sort of become aware of these things, right? Okay, you guys, I'm done, I think. What time is it? 10 o'clock already. Well, and how long was I talking there for? Don't know. Quite a long time, I guess. But okay, I'll talk to you guys later. Just wanted to chat for a little bit. Thanks for joining. How do I turn this shit off, man?